My name is Scott Schamber. I'm going to be 48 years old this year in 2019. I'm originally born and raised in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and I moved to Switzerland in 2001. And I've been living here the past 18 years, and I'm the managing director of Global Gold AG, or Global Gold AG. And but I've been with the BFI Capital Group for just about 16 years now. I'm not an economist myself. There's much more intelligent people that can speak on the subject than I can, but I can honestly say that I personally think that we're certainly at the end of a cycle here. The good times can't last, and whatever good times are, I guess that's a good question. It's a bit relative, I think, at this point. I know about a year ago I was in the US for a conference, and nobody was saying that things were going to be bad or that the possibility of a recession was coming. You were really contrarian to make any kind of comments at that time, and now it's kind of become the mainstream that something is happening, something's going to happen. And whether it's, I've talked to some people that want to think it's going to happen before the end of 2019. Others are saying the events will be the can will be kicked down the road until after the election in 2020. But pretty much to a person, I think we all believe within the next 2 years something is going to happen. And in that regard, I think it's definitely important to be thinking about precious metals. I mean, me personally, I started investing myself in gold and silver back in 2007. So right before the crisis, and what was really interesting is my wife couldn't figure out why we were investing in physical metals. I mean, there's no interest that you receive out of it. There's no, side benefit. The value just goes up or down, and it sits around. And to be honest, I mean, my background, having grown up in Milwaukee, I was from a middle-class family. I mean, if something didn't give you interest, like a certificate of deposit, it was just something we didn't invest in. So. It was a bit of because Global Gold had started within our group, and I thought, hey, I should try this precious metals thing and give it a shot. And after acquiring some metals, we got into 2008, 2009, the crisis hit, and it was relatively quick where we saw our assets drop 30 to 40% in one area. The precious metals part of what we owned, I mean, we even did some ETFs and things we could go into, buy in and out of very quickly as far as precious metals are concerned. And yeah, we realized pretty quickly that it was a great counterbalance. It was like being on a seesaw, and with some of the assets going down on one side, stocks and other securities, the gold was holding up the portfolio basically. So from that standpoint, that's where I became a believer right away in the ownership of precious metals. I just also what I just liked about them is how pretty they were. I mean, let's face it. If you've ever looked at a gold Canadian maple leaf or a silver Noah's Ark, whatever the case may be, I mean, it's really beautiful. And that I still had from the collector part of me from being a kid. I still always had that, hey, you own something like really special and valuable. And I think those two things really came together for me personally going forward. And then I continued to acquire. And yeah, sometimes I think I acquired some of my gold when, over $1,600 an ounce or whatever. But I quickly realized the value of being able to have something just in case everything else goes sour. Explaining it to my son even, and saying like, hey, this is something more than just a pretty shiny object, but this was always going to retain value. And even just making those explanations to him, and yeah, the whole package really came together for me. And now I realize, I mean, I've acquired a fair amount of especially physically allocated precious metals that I store in a few different places. I also still hold some metals ETFs. And I just know it's really supporting a part of that whole, the whole asset allocation that I have in my investments. I mean, the fact that I've lived here in Switzerland now for the last 18 years after, growing up, working part of my life in the U.S. I mean, obviously now I see the value of having to have some assets, both still in the U.S., but also the majority of them here in Switzerland in any case. Also, the time I've spent here in Switzerland in particular has really taught me, to trust the system. I am Swiss. I became Swiss in 2008, so I'm a dual U.S. and Swiss citizen. I've been able to vote, so I'm part of the voting democracy here in Switzerland, get that chance every 3 months to vote on a variety of different subjects from the county level all the way up to the federal level. And I just think being geographically distant from some of your assets is really important, you know, and I just really think about the indebtedness that the U.S. government is, to use the U.S. as the example. I mean, it just makes me feel better, and now having that geographical experience, it just makes me feel better to know I have some here and I have some there type of thing. I still do have some assets in the U.S. You know, I still have a retirement account that I'm kind of nest egging and letting sit there, but the majority of my assets are in Switzerland. And you know, even having that little bit in the U.S. just makes me feel a little bit comfortable that even if everything wasn't as great as it is in Switzerland someday, that there is still some a little bit in other places. And being here in Europe, we also have access to banking in other countries as well. So, I mean, even though I'm really in what I believe to be the best country in the world, and you know, I firmly believe that, having been here as long as I've been, I really think that it's just important to have something geographically away from you. And you know, the comment we've always made is that you might not, or your assets might not be able to follow you, but you should be able to follow your assets. And just that alone, I mean, if the you know what really hit the fan in the U.S. or anywhere for that matter, just to know you have somewhere that you can follow after some of your assets will not leave you empty-handed. You know, we were talking about it earlier a little bit, but I think of the story of my in-laws who came from Czechoslovakia in the late 60s. And I mean, they came to Switzerland, they came to the promised land for all intent and purpose, but they came with nothing. You know, they had to up and leave communism in Czechoslovakia. And, you know, I guess a lot of us can think, yeah, but that was the late 60s, that can never happen. But it happened, right? And if it happened once, why shouldn't it be able to happen again? So I just really think that having something geographically somewhere else, and then, you know, to take it a step further, I think it needs to be, you have to have some assets in a place where you feel more comfort in the overall situation, you know, the government situation, just safety in general, you know, and to me, Switzerland really represents that type of safety. I mean, we do have the direct democracy here. I think we have a relatively weak government, I would have to say, because of the fact that if we don't, you know, care for something as a voting public, we can bring it to referendum and you know, bring up an initiative and say, hey, we want to question these type of rules that were made earlier, even if we voted on it ourselves earlier. You know, the fact that you can bring it up again, certainly being able to vote here in Switzerland, I feel a lot more connected to the issues that are going on than I did per se in the U.S. I mean, I was actually in the 90s before I left, I was quite, you know, fed up with what does my vote count for anything. And here, I mean, when I vote for something, I really feel like I'm really tied to it, like my say means something. And I think that just on a broader level, that's really important because the Swiss people, you know, there's a huge amount of respect for personal property here. And you know, the example I always like to give is the umbrella. You know, when on a rainy day you go to the museum and everybody leaves their umbrella outside of the museum, and you walk around the museum for 3 hours, and you come out and you pick up your umbrella and you go home, you go about your day. And if I think in Milwaukee, I mean, there's no way your umbrella would be still standing out the door. So, and that's everywhere. You see that everywhere. I see that with my neighbors. I see that with, you know, the person at the counter at the grocery store who I've been going to for 16 years, and I still don't really know their name or much more about them other than the name tag that they have. So I really believe Switzerland, if I think of any place in the world, and I've traveled a lot now, I've had the good fortune of being to many different places. I mean, Switzerland to me still represents one of the safest, you know, where you feel like your rights and the things that you're really concerned about are still somewhat protected, you know, whereas, I don't know, I go back to the US about once a year, and I feel those things have really changed. I mean, they were changing already in the 90s. So I think that offshore aspect, the geographical distance is really important. The fact of being in a place that you find, you know, you should find safer than what you feel your own government and your own home jurisdiction offers you. I think that that's hugely, hugely valuable. A lot of times when I've thought about how things are here in Switzerland when it comes to that respect for personal property, I think what's really interesting is I was born in 1971, but I used to watch Leave It to Beaver in the U.S. And what I like to compare Switzerland to is maybe a little bit of the Leave It to Beaver-ish world, where things just seem, there's a different level of respect, there's a different level of how people treat each other. What I think is really interesting about the Swiss is that they know they have it good and they don't want to lose that. And that's hugely important because it is, I've said that story many times with people before that, in America, when you don't have what your neighbor has, there's a jealousy that's created that I want that. Why should he have that and not me? Whereas the Swiss, I think tend to look at it like, hey, that's really good that he's got that. Maybe that's not my thing, but that's really neat. Hey, they just put a whirlpool in their yard. That's really cool. Good for them. But that's where they leave it. They respect that that's on your property. That's what you want to do. And it really comes back to this idea, I think, that the Swiss, I don't know, they seem to know they have a good thing, so why ruin it? And I believe in America, we go, well, we know if I have a good thing, I want to protect that from anybody else, but if I got a good thing, I want a piece of that, and I might do something, I don't care at what expense it might be to you, but I want a piece of that action. And, so I don't know, selfish is the right word to use, but maybe it could be a little bit. I think there's a bit more of that attitude, whereas here people respect that, you have what you have, and they don't want things to change. The Swiss have a really good thing here. I don't think it would work for every country, and maybe Switzerland wouldn't work if it had 200 million people in it either. So the Swiss have it, I think, really, really well that way, but they understand how good they have it, and they appreciate that, and they use that when they vote. Still, one of the things I found funniest was we voted a couple years back on extending the amount of vacation time. So, like when you're a 25-year-old going to work for a company, you get 4 weeks of holiday here, of vacation. And at that time, and that's a minimum. It can't be as a full-time employee, you can't have less than 4 weeks. And they were actually talking about raising that minimum to 5 weeks. Now, how do you think Americans would vote if they said, hey, we're going to extend the absolute minimum vacation that you can have? That would probably be the biggest one-sided vote in American history. People would go like, hell yeah, we want extra vacation. And interestingly, here in Switzerland, the people voted against it. They said, well, but this could affect small businesses. Or, they understood the impacts that it could have. And again, to a certain degree, I think they knew how good they already had it. So I think that's a classic example of just the respect that they know how good they have it. And it's interesting because you'd think too, as the younger people get a little bit older, you'd think maybe there could be a change in that. But it extends, I guess, through the school system and everything that's born and engraved in people, from child as they're getting older. And I just really think that it's really sewn into the identity of the Swiss people here, that amount of respect for that property. Well, plain and simple, to be able to harness what we have in Switzerland here, I think obviously is to try to, if you're looking to completely protect yourself, in a number of different ways, not just, I got to protect my cash that I have or whatever the case may be, but the world's continuing to get more international. Even us Americans from the Midwestern part of the U.S., where we used to be born, raised, live, and die in that place like Milwaukee, even, we're getting out more and more. The world is becoming more international for us Americans. And I think, again, it's great to be able to take advantage of something like Switzerland. Hey, Switzerland's not perfect either, okay? Our government's not perfect either. I'm not trying to say that. I'm not trying to go to some different plane of like Switzerland's the best place in the world. I still love the U.S. I was born and raised there. I love to go vacation there. I probably wouldn't want to live there anymore. I really love living in Switzerland. But I just think it's important, again, from the standpoint of, how much do you trust the U.S. government when it's all said and done? Is our retirement funds and individual retirement accounts, are they really safe in the U.S.? Or could the government come back to us someday and say, hey, this is how you need to invest these assets? You know, I personally like the freedom of my own choice, you know, and I respect the fact that I have that freedom of choice. And I think you know, Americans maybe were in the past where we thought anybody that's investing outside of the U.S. is ultra privileged and must be doing something illegal, and that's not the case. I mean, the case is if you're concerned about protecting your assets, and you know, you need to have a plan B. I mean, even within our business, we have a plan B because we have the majority of our storage of our precious metals is done in Zurich in Switzerland, but we also have options in Singapore and Hong Kong. And for us, you know, if Switzerland was not the place to store anymore, and if Switzerland was not the place that we know it is today, that we have a second option. And I think individuals need to think the same way. They have to have a plan B because of a situation, again, like my in-laws who escaped communism. You know, it can happen from one day to the next, something that we can't even imagine. And I just think it's important to be able to have some assets somewhere else that you trust, that you feel secure about, that helps you sleep at night, to go, okay, you know, if you're responsible with your money, you don't want to have it all in one spot so that it can suddenly disappear for whatever reason. You want to have it in a couple different places, and why not keep it somewhere where you say, hey, you know, these people are actually still voting on stuff that impacts their lives every day, and you know, they're still making relatively responsible decisions. And you know, I mean, Switzerland has been a home for investors' assets for many years, and it's still, you know, despite all the bad press that it's received, I think, over the years, starting with UBS in 2007 and so on and so forth. I think it's really easy for the media to get their hands on something, and they like Swiss bashing when it comes to investments. You know, there must be something wrong with Switzerland, but the fact is if you're just somebody that is concerned about your assets, you want to protect them, plain and simple. First and foremost, let's face it, the majority of the information we get is from the media in some way, shape, or form. And I think at the end of the day, if you're going to make responsible decisions, you don't want to base your decisions on one thing, right? You know, if you have a buffet, you don't go to a buffet to eat just the lobster. You want to try everything else. Or if you have a nice salad bar, you want to pile it up on your plate, for example. But the fact is that you want to take your information from a few different places, and it's easy to get pigeonholed into hearing one side of a story. I think that's what's really unique. You know, we mentioned, or we had discussed about the size of Switzerland and how in the U.S., you know, you can drive for 12 hours, and the fact is you know, everything is pretty much still the same. Switzerland fits in the state of Wisconsin, and when you drive from one corner of Wisconsin to the other, nothing has changed. But here in Switzerland, within, you know, an hour and a half, everybody's speaking French or Italian or something like that. So it's quite diverse. I just think overall, you know, the infrastructure here is incredible. The fact that, you know, the trains run on time, that's pretty much a cliche that people like to joke about, but it's completely true. If a train is 45 seconds late here, people start grumbling about it. So everything really, you know, runs on time here. You know, I don't know how to explain at the end of the day how it's become this place that it's become. But, you know, certainly, again, if I try to think of any other place in the world that I've been to or that I've heard other people talking about, I mean, I don't know, Switzerland, where else? If there was ever a commercial, you know, Switzerland, where else? I couldn't imagine where else you would think that. Yeah, people continue to put money offshore despite, you know, the stories we've heard, and still this assumption that if you're sending funds offshore that it must be something illegal. I don't know where you know, first and foremost, just from a practical standpoint, if you think of me, I've lived here 18 years. Do you think it would make sense as an American that I still had all my assets in the U.S.? First and foremost, practically no, right? If you're going to be somewhere else in the world, you got to have bank accounts. You have to do different things, and prior to the popular belief, no, it is still possible for us Americans to have bank accounts here. I mean, the fact that I live here and reside here, it's quite easy for me to open a bank account. Although, that being said, I too was kicked out of some of the banks when we went through the whole, FATCA and all these things that happened in the late 2010s and into 2010. I think the reason that you need to go and look beyond the traditional paper metals or ETF type of solution for precious metals, I'm a firm believer that you still should have some like actual physical coins or bars at home. I personally am not a doomsdayer at all. I mean, I tend to always see the cup as half full. Even when things are really bad, I'm still like very optimistic that, hey, things are going to come around some way, shape, or form. We got to keep our heads up type of thing. But in any case, I feel quite good keeping a little bit close to the chest, because if something did happen, if we woke up with one of these bank holidays on a Monday or like the Cyprus situation where all of a sudden, or Greece where you couldn't take out more than $100 or whatever the case may be, suddenly you're restricted to what you have access to. I mean, I just really like the idea of having something, close to me that I know I could still use that has value. That at the end of the day, if me and my family needed a loaf of bread and all of a sudden they weren't accepting our paper currency, that I could go get a 1 ounce silver coin and take it and trade it for something. So that's one part of what I believe. I just really like the aspect of the physically allocated precious metals, because at the end of the day, it's something that still has value. I just think it's amazing that we put so much trust in our bank notes, our US dollars, even our Swiss francs, any currency that in essence, if you just really pare it down, it's paper, right? At the end, and it can burn up. Paper can, you can light it on fire and it's gone. And whereas with something like gold and silver, I mean, it's something solid. It's something that retains value. And so while I would never poo-poo anybody that, thinks, hey, definitely do precious metals. If an ETF works for you, that's great. If a paper claim for precious metals works for you, great. I think what's most important is an investor has to do what works for them, at the end of the day. But for me, when it comes down to it, when I think of precious metals, I really like to know that I have the physical, that if I really need it, I can still go trade it in for money if I need to. And let's face it, even if we hit another crisis here soon and precious metals shoot up to $2,000, $3,000 an ounce, maybe there's going to be another point in 10, 15, 20 years where it's going to come back down to $800 an ounce. But the fact is that you still have something of value no matter what happens, right? And you can't say the same about that with something electronic. I think that's why, too, one of the really great things I love about Global Gold is it's a non-banking solution. So we don't need to rely on banks or the markets to function in order for you to have precious, access to your precious metals. You just need to be able to contact us, and it can be through a letter if you want. It can be really the old school way of contact, or you can, through a messenger that we have now, through our portal where, it's encrypted and you have a high level of security. But the fact is that if something happened to the banks, or if they suddenly restricted that you have access to what you have in a bank, I think it's also good to have something on the side that, you can reach. And why not that be something that actually has a value to it? In the 16 years I've been with our group, I've seen so many people come to us that had brought their bank statements and said, hey, here's the precious metals that I own. And you start reading through it and you're like, do you really own these bars that it says you have? And only for these people to go and find out from their bank that it is just a claim, that the physical metal wasn't actually there. And wow, that's powerful, right? What you thought you had wasn't even what you had, and you put your trust in this financial institution to have what you thought you had, and they don't have it. And so to me, that's really powerful, and that speaks a lot for having physically allocated precious metals. Global Gold offers pretty much plain and simply the purchase and storage of physically allocated precious metals. I mean, that's the elevator pitch side of it. Of course, it's much more than that, but I think the key things there are that it's a non-banking solution. We at Global Gold, we also don't hedge anybody's precious metals. We don't loan them out. there's nothing, it's a one-to-one program. I mean, when you buy 21 ounce Canadian gold Canadian maple leafs, that's what comes in, that's what's stored for you. And what's on the back side then, if you ever want to sell, or if you want to take delivery, or even come here to Switzerland, the beautiful country, and pick them up, they're always available for you. There's no fabrication costs. So it's really, we're talking pure physically allocated precious metals with storage. And the majority of our clients use storage here in Switzerland. Again, as I'd mentioned before, we also have storage in some other locations, but the majority hold it here in Switzerland. And I think we also, what's unique about our service offering is that we allow for in-kind transfers. So we'll actually, if you have precious metals in your family, or if you're storing them at a bank, or whatever the case may be, and you like the service that Global Gold provides, we will do in-kind transfers. We also work with institutions, so we offer like a white label solution for institutions, if whether it's an insurance company or bank. So much on a broader scale. I think what's also pretty unique about Global Gold that I can say is that there's a lot of precious metals companies that have automated everything. And in the 16 years I've been with the BFI Capital Group, I mean, we've always placed a lot of pride in personal service that we give to everybody. And whether for us at Global Gold, it's the same whether you have $50,000 worth of precious metals with us or $5 million. I mean, we want to take care of all of our investors the same way. We want to make sure that we get back to them as soon as possible. We know that with the benefit of having the geographical distance between you and your assets also comes with the negative side that you're also geographically far from us. We unfortunately don't even get to meet a lot of our clients ever personally. And so I think we take a lot of pride in our team to just really make sure and bridge that gap between our continents and make it feel like it's as close as possible. So that I'm very proud of the work we've done as a group over time, and I think we're really still doing that with Global Gold. The big differences between allocated and unallocated storage. I mean, unallocated storage is basically where you buy X amount of precious metals. So you can send over $10,000 and you'll buy 5.6234 ounces of a precious metal. Unallocated means the physical isn't there. You basically have a claim to this amount of precious metals that are with this company. That's fine. I mean, you're not paying for storage of that precious metal. You're not paying for fabrication of that metal. So it is a cheaper alternative. But the big question then is, if everybody suddenly made a run and needed those metals back, would the company be able to provide that to you? Also, how do you provide 6.27567 ounces of precious metals to somebody? I think that's too, it's quite interesting. I've heard from a lot of investors and clients where they worked with a precious metals company where they were told, they had this amount of metals, but at the end of the day, if they wanted delivery, it was actually just fractional ownership. So your 10 ounces that you owned, they can only pay out in 1 kilogram bars. Well, obviously that doesn't equal one another. So the problem is how do you get your precious metals? Well, you probably get a cash payout, right? Because they're not going to sliver off a little, tiny thin piece off of a 1 kilogram bar. So to me, that's unallocated storage. I think, again, a great option, if you have a low tolerance for not wanting to pay for storage and pay for the extra fabrication of having that physical metal. Allocated precious metals is just, it's there. It's, if you buy 21 ounce coins, you own 21 ounce coins. And that's what's always there for you. And if you ever need 5 of them, you can come and pick up 5 of them, or 5 of them can be delivered, or you can sell 5 of them. Then you have 15. So it's just plain and simple math. What you buy and you bring in is exactly what's there for you at any time that you need it. So to me, that's the biggest difference. Yes, with allocated precious metals, you do have to consider that, you're going to pay spot price plus a premium, plus then you have to pay the annual storage fees on holding that metal. But I think there's so much to be said again, about having storage someplace that's very secure, even holding precious metals at home. Again, a great idea to hold some on you, but what do you do with it? Do Do you store it in, underneath your bed or in your sock drawer? Not exactly the safest thing to do. Do you have a safe at home? Probably a good idea. You don't want to be talking about what you have at home in the safe to everybody. A huge amount of privacy that people don't even realize they give up by doing something like that. But at the end of the day, then you have to say, well, what else can I do with this? I don't want to keep $200,000 worth of precious metals in my home scattered in different places. Now what happens? Again, if you suddenly have to leave for whatever reason, it's there, you're exposed. So I just think it's critical, from that allocated standpoint, that if you're going to have allocated precious metals, you also have to have a safe place to store it. What we do to protect the client, their physical holdings that they have. So if you had a situation where you were at home and maybe you don't even want to tell anybody about your precious metals and suddenly they're stolen. So what do? You can't even prove that you had them. You're out really at the end of the day. If you don't even claim them as part of insurance or whatever, I mean, that could be a huge problem. For us, one of the things that we do is what you pay for the storage includes 100% insurance on those precious metals. So if, anything happened, there was water damage, theft, whatever the case may be, the fact is that it's 100% insured while it's in our storage facility. So, and not only do we have the insurance for our clients, but also the storage facility has insurance. So there's really a couple different layers of protection that a client or somebody that is holding precious metals with us receives. And at the end of the day, I mean, you want to know that you want to sleep well at night, right? You want to know that it's protected, and a lot of times I think, even me, we have safe deposit box that we open here in Switzerland, and as much as I trust the Swiss banking system, there's still a part of me that doesn't trust it fully. I'm still hesitant to keep it all there again, because who knows what would happen. And I think it's quite important to know, and that's, I think, a lot of people, especially if they're investing offshore with some of the companies, if they don't read the fine print, a lot of times the insurance isn't included, or insurance only up to a certain level. So they're missing out, or maybe they're underinsured even with the amount of precious metals we have there. And I can tell you we have insurance coverage way beyond the amount of precious metals that we store for our clients. What I would like to still share with investors, particularly American investors, is really the point that I really think it's critical to have something outside of the U.S. in particular. I mean, even if it's having some funds in Canada or Mexico, I just think it's a really good idea to get a footprint somewhere else. And I gotta be honest. I mean, if I would have stayed in Milwaukee and done whatever I would have done, maybe I wouldn't have the attitude I have today. But I'm a regular Joe when it comes down to it. I moved abroad not because of any premonition, because of work. I fell in love, and I've continued to grow and thrive in Switzerland, in a different country with different rules to a certain degree, different way of life. I just think it's really important, that us as Americans got to realize it's a big world out there, and I just think it's critical that we can't get so used to, the Leave It to Beaver times are way over in the U.S. and things are changing and the world's becoming more international. I don't think it has to be, and it certainly isn't scary. I mean, if I'm able to move to Switzerland, I'm sure many, many other people could do the same thing. The people are we're all people. And I think it's time, if you haven't done it already as an American, to think outside the box and just realize that it's a big world out there. I think one of the great stories I love to tell a lot is about my in-laws, who were born and raised in Czechoslovakia, in Prague. And what's really interesting is my wife's father was a doctor. He studied to be a doctor, as part of the communist system. I don't even know if he really wanted to be a doctor, but the fact was communism drew him into that, and that's what he was going to be, right? And so he became a doctor, was successful in Czechoslovakia, and was doing just fine, him and his wife. And what's really interesting, and what really emphasizes then the point of considering offshore, taking some assets offshore, is the fact that here you are, your husband and wife, you're a doctor, you've made good money, you have assets, you're building assets, and all of a sudden something like the communist revolution, the communists came in and they literally went from one day to the next having everything to having nothing and having to rebuild their lives in Switzerland. And they're lucky, honestly, because they had the Swiss option, right? He was a doctor. The Swiss were looking for doctors at the time, so they gave him and his wife citizenship. So, I mean, what they had was a chance to start over. But man, there's got to be countless stories of people that didn't have that chance and like really had to fight and struggle to get even close to the place they were when something like that would have happened. And to me, that hits really close to home to know that, gosh, you could have it all, and that so quickly something could happen. And, at the time, I don't think, that even under communism, right, it wasn't, you weren't allowed to look outside of communism, right? Everything non-communism was bad. And, the pleasures of the West were, I remember going to Czechoslovakia myself when I was 12 and being really surprised when people asked me, oh, you really have this? And you're actually quite normal. I thought everybody was rich. And, there was a huge misconception, just like I think we probably did of communists, people living in communist countries as well. But yeah, it's just crazy that the fact that you can have it all and, from one day to the next, it could all be taken away. I think that's a powerful message. Yeah, and what I think is really interesting is they didn't have the opportunity to necessarily invest outside of Czechoslovakia at the time, so they had all their assets in one place. And let's face it, if they would have been able to put some outside of Czechoslovakia, if they would have been able to invest anywhere else, at least the start over would have been that much easier, right? At least you have something that you can go to. You can follow your assets, right? And again, that's a powerful message to think that, I guess to put it in today's terms, if you have the possibility to invest outside of your home country, why not do it just in case something like that happens, so that you have something to go to, so that you don't have to start from ground zero again. And, let's face it, if that kind of situation happens, you're going to have lots of other worries as well of how does life get back to normal? How do I start over again? And, if you've got $50,000 worth of precious metals stored somewhere where you can go get it right away and convert it to cash if you need to or whatever to just start life over again, why not give yourself that opportunity? Why not, plan for that rainy day?
Excellent.